Morning. How are we feeling? Students, how are you feeling this morning? Okay. All right. So, um, okay, so once again, you're welcome to ALA's decennial, second day of the decennial celebrations. I hope you've enjoyed everything that you have attended so far. I don't know if you were here yesterday, but yesterday was was a really good day. So, um, this morning, we are going to be learning from and about Mr. Adler. For the second year students in the room, we pretty much know him as the very stern entrepreneur who's not going to mince his words. Like you go for an investment council meeting, he's like, "What do you need this money for?" "No, I don't think this plan makes sense." "Okay, so you can move aside, go and work on it, and come back later." So yeah, but for the first years, you don't really know him yet. But Mr. Adler is our no nonsense entrepreneur in this space, and just like I did, he started his entrepreneurial journey at the age of 19. That's really young. He created an online music industry which used to create magazines, which started out making magazines, which taught how to record music. It was basically the only all music focused magazine in the country. And after a few years of successful magazine production and selling, advertising, Josh and his team realized that they could make more money from selling the software which they used to make the magazine. And so they pretty much moved from the actual magazine into the software, which started producing magazines for different people and places, right? Yeah. And today, so what we're actually going to learn today it stems from the fact that Mr. Adler acknowledges the fact that he had a lot of support from the people around him, from individuals, from groups, and that's the kind of support that the Global Programs Department in ALA hopes to give student entrepreneurs on campus. And so basically that's what his job here is, and he's going to tell us a lot more about how he managed to get far within a short time at a young age, thanks to the people around him and the resources around him. And so he's going to show us how to leverage those resources, how it worked for him, and then the importance of such things. And so without much ado, let's welcome our very own Mr. Josh Adler.
Thank you so much, Shosho. I'm actually going to sit down. I'm finding like the overwhelming sense of the last few days, it's supposed to be quite emotional, and there are a few of us here. I'm going to make it a short talk and then hopefully more of a conversation. So with your permission, I'm just going to relax a little while we talk about ALA's big plan for Africa's very, very young entrepreneurs. I'm not sure who of you were here yesterday. Who was here yesterday and who was here in assembly? So Trevor Luera, who's one of our current students, he said something that really resonated with me, and is that his generation, they can't afford not to care about politics, and they can't afford to avoid politics or be apathetic about it. And I would take that a step further. I think Trevor's generation and the students and alumni of African Leadership Academy, they can't afford not to care about jobs. And I'll say that again. I don't think anyone who is thinking about Africa right now can afford not to care about jobs and work. And it's one of our fundamental beliefs. I hope you've all got your decennial book. And if you look at our founding beliefs, there's a line in it that says entrepreneurship is fundamental to growth. So as Shosha mentioned, I've been at ALA for now 5 years, but I also started my own businesses when I was very young. And I've been part of a team here that's been really thinking about what is ALA's role and approach to engaging with entrepreneurship, but as a vehicle to fundamentally create jobs. That's really the why of it all. So if you take one thing away from my discussion with you today, I'd like it to be that you understand what our theory of change is for this. This is the thing we're fundamentally seeking to test and prove. So our big hypothesis goes something like this. One of the most pressing questions that Africa faces today is how best to support the almost 8 million entrants into the job market annually. That's the very young. That's not all job seekers. That's people who are essentially leaving school very young, 15 to 19, that are entering and hoping to find meaningful work. So that's the first point. The second is our experience, and our experience so far, and maybe this resonates with your own, is that very young entrepreneurs hire people the same age or younger than they are. Broadly, we actually think as you get older, you hire your peer group. but what we do know is that very young entrepreneurs generally hire people their own age and younger. So it follows then that if we can significantly increase the number of very young people that choose to be entrepreneurs very early, we can make a big dent in that number of people who are not going to be seeking jobs because they will hire each other. And that's our central hypothesis, right? We can't prove it yet. It's a hypothesis. But we're very excited about it, and we think it makes sense, and we've got a lot of anecdotal evidence so far to support it. So how does one do that, and what is ALA's role in that? And that's what I'm here to share with you today, right? So are we all ready to hear about ALA's really big plan for very, very young entrepreneurs? All in favor? Yeah. Good, a little bit of audience feedback. Thank you so much. So I'm going to just, the first part of our plan is all about movies. So who here can, I'm hoping we all remember our time at school. Who here ever remembers thinking after having completed school, hey, I'd like to start a school? Oh, wow. You're an anomaly. But at the same time, not very many. I think if you take your 4 examples, those that raised your hand, as well as our 2 founders, Chris and Fred had this thought to start a school. And that's what we're here to celebrate. They actually did it. They created a school. A big part of what happens here is this amazing school. And one of the things that has happened that has taken us by surprise is how many graduates of ALA have decided to start schools. And we've been wondering a little bit about what is the relationship between that example of Chris and Fred and the number of ALA graduates who came and experienced this program and have decided to enter education. And is there anything about that? If I relate that to my own personal experience, so as Shosho mentioned, I started at 19. This was the late 90s, without giving too much away, and I started an online magazine for making music. But it was the very, very early days of the internet. There was no social media. And I read a lot, but I didn't read biographies. I hated them. I read how-to things, like how to, business how-to type stuff or technical how-to, either music or otherwise. And what I'm pointing to is the celebrity culture of entrepreneurship, where we have these I would argue, a very few, but really big global entrepreneurship icons that are significantly revered. That hadn't happened yet. But in hindsight, about my experience, I had incredible role models around and near me. There was a young man who was a year ahead of me that had started a similar online magazine, a different topic, and was doing really well, selling advertising to corporates for this thing. And I was like, wow, that's amazing, I can do that. And similarly, there was a story of 4 people who were about 7 or 8 years ahead of us, And they had built a company and recently sold it to a big company and had done really well. And it was just a very relatable example because we just studied the same stuff and had similar things around us. I had an uncle who had started with very little and had done really well as an entrepreneur. And the point I'm trying to make is that our ALA students, if you think about Chris and Fred and what they did, and in my case, our role models are very near, highly relatable, accessible. You can see the next step you have to take. You can even compete with them. You can say, I could do that. I could even do it better, right? That's all accessible. And that's contrasting a little with the big global celebrity entrepreneur stuff we're celebrating at the moment, or we're seeing so significantly celebrated. They're so far away from the reality of where a young person at 19 is. It's quite hard to build what is the next step. So, what has this got to do with movies? We believe fundamentally that you can accelerate young people into entrepreneurship by showing them the right movie at the right time. And that's what we're going to be starting to do. So that's the first part of our big plan, and we can talk a bit about it later, okay? So assuming that we can get many more young Africans to choose to become entrepreneurs, once they do so, how can we ensure both that they're successful, or not only that they're successful, but they're successful in a job-generative way? Because that's relating to our big challenge. We don't have enough jobs. So, rockets. The second big part, or the second pillar of our big plan, is that we have to build a lot of rockets. And I'm going to explain what I mean. So, you can't see it, but you've touched it a little bit with the cashless card you would have got to interact with our campus. But ALA's campus is one big entrepreneurship simulator. It's a really, really sophisticated simulated economy with real money. We capitalize it every year with about $5,000. We invest debt, equity, and grants. Students come as teams to pitch to me and others. As Shosha mentioned, that's often interesting and difficult. We do all sorts of interesting, quite well thought through engagements to make sure that there's significant collective learning. And we're doing all that we can to facilitate trade between students and the institution. So there's a government that sets rules, they pay taxes, they pay rent, all the different things in a very, very real sense. And they succeed and fail together as a team. And the other really interesting thing about ALA is that, as you might have heard, our community has had 46 different African countries represented here in the student body, of all different backgrounds, socioeconomic and otherwise. So you can just imagine how much more we get to see about what will work and what won't work for young Africans by simulating an economy for them. That's really unique about this community. We can run very, very different, or gain very, very different insights than many others are able to do, simply because of who is here. So this is just one of the many experiments we have been running. This is one of the longest running ones. But we've been running others. I think the biggest lesson we've learned from the Student Enterprise Program is that the most important skill, and skill building is so important for us to differentiate from knowledge, but the most important skill a teenager needs to learn if they're going to be a successful job-generative entrepreneur is the ability to build, lead, and be part of a team. I'm going to say that again. The most important skill that a teenager needs to learn in order to be a job-generative entrepreneur is to be able to build, lead, and be part of a team. And the other thing that we've learned is that the best way to teach teams is to be a coach. If you think about a field of play as the economy that we have, the best way to help teams engage in economy, just like team sport at school, is to be a coach rather than a typical teaching modality. The other thing that we've learned is that we can influence the attitudes of people who are not going to become entrepreneurs to think better about those who do. So we have the future leadership of the continent here. Only a fraction of them are going to choose to be entrepreneurs, but the others are going to be in business and government. We want them to be better procurers and better policymakers. And one of the big things you can do is build empathy for young entrepreneurs by ensuring they have the opportunity to practice what it's like to be one in a simulated economy like this. And I guarantee you, without a shadow of doubt, our graduates and students will be much more empathetic, more aggressive procurers and enablers of other young people, no matter their age later, because of the foundational experience they had of being an entrepreneur here through the simulator. And that's really, really big. So you've got to accelerate. So we're building rockets. These rockets are tests that we want young entrepreneurs and young leaders to ride on to quickly as possible move on something. We've done some other tests too. So for example, like how can you be a really opinionated customer of a young entrepreneur in a way that encourages them to be job generative? So many of the entrepreneurs that come through ALA's programs, eventually we become their client in some way. And we'll push them to hire and hire early. And that's a really interesting thing that you can try to do. And we want to teach people, other organizations, how to be a better customer that drives job generative growth of young people. We've also figured out or tried a test on, can you create internships for entrepreneurs so they can see different kinds of things in a way that would allow them to be more job generative. So see examples of similar businesses that have driven growth by hiring people, right? And these are some of the responsibilities we think we have to drive this. So the second big pillar of our plan is we have to continue to design and test rockets. But the thing that we have to do, which is new, and there's a colleague of mine in the room that's going to help me do that from our institutional learning team, is we have to share it. We have significantly more resources than many others. People need to understand what we tried, and people need to be able to build their own rockets. And we're hoping to enable other people, schools, youth development institutions, to learn from the rockets we built and build their own quicker. So, let's assume now that we've accelerated many more young Africans into entrepreneurship. Let's assume now we can also encourage them to be more job generative. What about the things that could block them? The third big pillar of what we're going to do is coaches. So I don't have a big story to tell here because it's quite new. And we haven't really done much of it. We've been running teacher training programs for some time. But our belief, however, is that there are some significant barriers to access and success for very young entrepreneurs of this age because of who's around them. And if you think about the three biggest influences of a teenager, it's generally parents, friends, and teachers. Right? Those would be three really important influences, of the decision of what you're going to do in life. When you're a teenager, you're consulting these three groups: your friends, your parents, and your teachers, while you're 15 to 19, to say, what sort of career, what am I going to study, how am I going to do this, right? I think that would be a broad consensus. So we're going to pick two of those, parents and teachers, and we're going to give them the tools to be better coaches of young entrepreneurs. ALA is a high-touch model. We invest deeply in a few to have macro change. I hope that came through in Keem and others' conversation today. That's the whole idea of what we do here. So we're going to do the same with another group of people, which is parents and teachers as coaches of young entrepreneurs of high potential. And if we can accelerate them to reduce the barriers and improve the success factors of people who choose to do this, we think we'll have done very well. So, those are the three pillars of what we're doing. We want people to see the right movie at the right time, and we have access to over 150 stories of Africa's brightest and best entrepreneurs who already chose to do this. Our Nzisho program and our alumni select the very best entrepreneurs on the continent of this age. We're going to tell their stories, and we can get them in the right cinema, at the right time, at a local level. we're going to invest in rockets. They're going to be open source model rockets. We're going to explode them. Some will fly to the moon, but we're going to share them so that others can fly them just as fast as we can with entrepreneurs on the back. And then we're going to invest deeply in tools to help parents and teachers become better coaches of young African entrepreneurs of high potential who choose to do this. So, to conclude, and I'd like to open up for some questions, I hope that I've made you curious about whether we're right, about the theory that if we choose to invest in the stories and capabilities of very young, very high potential entrepreneurs, it could be some sort of Trojan horse attack on youth unemployment, these 8 million that have to enter. And it's not the only answer. We have to have a portfolio approach to this, but this is one that could really work. I want you feeling strongly about there are some key skills that we're not really talking about in education. You know, this thing about team leadership building and participation, which has to be acquired really early if you're going to be job generative in the way you approach things, right? We're very great and individual focused in our schooling modalities across the world right now. I think we could all agree on that, so we need to intervene on that level. And that you also have a little bit of a sense of what we've been up to for the last 10 years and where we're going. So thank you for listening to a little bit about our plan for Africa's very young entrepreneurs. And I'd love to open it up to a conversation, any clarifications, questions, and we can have a little bit of a chat. Thank you.
Any questions? Thank you very much, Mr. Adler. Questions?
Hello, my name is Fatin Zihassan. I'm with NEPAD Agency. NEPAD Agency is the development agency of the African Union. I'm the chief of staff to the CEO over there, and I'm also leading Skills and Employment for Youth program. So part of our job is to support the governments in creating the policies, the instruments, and the tools that will allow them to create sustainable jobs. So obviously this is of high interest to me. I heard you talked about your the feedback, well, the lessons you learned from coaching and supporting these 150 entrepreneurs, and I'm really excited about it. I think we're going to pursue this conversation forward. But now my question would be, I get that this is a program that you have been running with the brightest minds of the countries, of the continent. Now, how do you make sure that what you learned here is also going to have an impact on the mass of the youth, the ones who are dropouts or drop-offs, the ones who are not as educated or as bright as the ones who end up here? And how do you make sure that this can have, we can also leverage on what you have learned so that it can have an impact across the continent? Thank you.
Thank you. I don't know if this is on. Thanks. Thank you so much for that question. I love the question because it speaks to something we get asked all the time, and it's also really helpful to clarify what ALA's view on scale is. So we get these questions every week. When are you building your next school? How will this be bigger? And the overarching theory of change of ALA is a demonstration effect one, and then a power of a small number of people to effect significant change themselves. So ALA's model is that we will develop 6,000 young leaders over 50 years, and they will go into amazing places and seek out hard problems to solve and make a really big impact that way. The same for our entrepreneur program. We are seeking those that have already taken a step to demonstrating that they can do this, and then we're going to celebrate their stories to encourage first others to be like them, and for those that choose to do that, to then employ others. I will be candid in the sense that I don't think that our overarching theory is going to directly touch, it will touch through some of the people that you described. Our hope is that just like we're seeing with our students who are starting schools that are very different to ours, for people who are very different to the communities that ALA is serving, we'll reach scale that way. But I wouldn't want to sort of bandy about the bush on that or be disingenuous. Our scale is through investing in very high potential young people as a demonstration effect. And we get this, we rarely get this question all the time. So ALA's theory of scale is through people, and we're going to continue that investment. I do think, though, that some of the rockets we build will be applicable to anybody, and we need to ensure that we package them in a way that they're very accessible to any teacher and any coach if they choose to use them in other ways. And I think that's our collective responsibility. Is there another question? Yes.
So I'm intrigued with your economy on campus, and that you run the whole campus as an entrepreneurial business generator of some kind or other. And so the question is that packaged in a new way? Because it just seems to be, you've done all the hard work, and it's the kind of thing that could be transferred to other institutions. And it is, I mean, I'm from South Africa, and the South African schooling system, it is, inverted commas, the elephant in the room. It's one thing that's in the curriculum, but in actual fact, should be.
Yes.
But that's going to take a while.
I agree. Thank you for the question. We've been working very hard on this for a long time. It's been a personal passion project. Those of the students and teachers here will know, I've been trying to get this cashless system working, which is how do you create a cashless environment within a campus that one creates a safety for cash because it's important to do, two is a financial literacy tool, and three enables you to not only enable trade, but monitor what kind of trade happens so you can learn from it to inform curriculum and programming. And it's a hard nut to crack. I don't even think we've got it yet. I'm on version 3 of the cashless system, which now finally includes like a mobile wallet app, virtual currency base for it, which is how the kids want to engage, and they can move money to each other for the first time. But we're working aggressively to have that as something that can be released, and not only work where you want to have your whole school run as an economy, but you want to maybe run a simulated economy for a few days. Like, let's say over a weekend you want to create sort of a fate trading environment, and you want to be able to grab this thing where people can come, you can trade with each other and stuff, and then you can also lead and inform and then debrief that experience, because that's the big one. It's very hard to watch it all and then engage with your students afterwards. So you have to have a tool that allows you to watch what happens and say, what was the transaction volume like? What was the transaction frequency like? What was the transaction value like? And then you're trying to say to kids, you can increase your margins by increasing volume value, you know, those sorts of questions. So we're very much, it's one of the big rockets, which we're not finished with. And when it's ready, I think we'll be aggressively releasing it, and as freely as possible. Yes?
Hi, is it on? Okay. Hi, my name is Tessa from Youth Nation Leadership Movement. My question is in 2 parts. So I'm, as you can tell, like I gave up my 9 to 5 and started this thing with kids. So I've been involved in an art for a while. With regards to your 150 stories, do you actually have a team already shooting the movies? Do you have a production house? How far are you in that process? Okay. And the second part of the question is, with everything that actually happens, particularly to children and teenagers on the African continent, how much have you invested in their emotional development? Because to be an entrepreneur, you have to have a particular type of mindset to start with. Okay. And a relatively thick skin. But also what I've noticed quite a lot with young kids is that we teach them all of these amazing fundamentals on how to run a business, and they're very successful. But their downfall is that their emotional development is not supported to the same extent. And at some point, it threatens all the successes that they do. So I hear a lot about everything else except for that aspect. How are you addressing that part?
Thank you. I love both questions. So the first is movies was an example rather than the thing we're very intentionally going to make. One, movie is actually quite expensive to make well. That's just a figure of speech for stories. Okay, and we're going to use whatever mechanism, including film, is best to tell the right story at the right time. We're also going to do it through different channels. So for example, we're going to be doing a big case studies project as a teaching aid for the high school level. We're considering a Hall of Fame for people who are very successful today but started at 19. And how do you make that come to life? So we can take offline if that's something you do, but we will be investing with whoever is willing to help us tell these stories to do that. And we certainly, we just want them to, we want to be clear on how do you identify the moment that you're telling the story about, which is helpful to a person just 2 or 3 steps behind that to then make a very different choice than they might have been on a path to otherwise, and therefore choosing entrepreneurship or value creation rather than seeking employment. The emotional intelligence stuff is massive, and I think we're completely aligned. It's why I spoke about the primary skill people need to learn is how to build and lead teams rather than, what an income statement is. We're completely on the wrong track with that at this age group. It's the problem with the definition of youth. Up to 35 means you don't differentiate any programming for 15 to 19, 19 to 25, 25 to 35. It's all entrepreneurship programming. And that's a huge problem. So the emotional intelligence stuff that we do here within our entrepreneurial leadership program, because we actually believe entrepreneurship is a subset of the leadership question. You need diplomatic leaders, you need people who are going to be in corporate and other things. So this is one subset. All of that proactivity, the confidence to, and fear of failure, all those sorts of things. I think we have very strong curriculum and coaching tools to help our young leaders get over that hurdle. And we've run very successful educator programs. Over 100 teachers come here a year from all over Africa to learn about how we do that. How do you engage young people and build them up in that way as entrepreneurial leaders, and build up things like proactivity and other behaviors. So I'd love to talk to you about it afterwards and can help. Okay. Any other questions? How are we for time? I think we're okay. Yes. Margaret, before you do that, could I ask a guest? Thanks. Yes. No, please. Hi.
I'm from a pharmaceutical company, Bianca. I do training and people development within the industry and for the company. And we're sitting with a problem at the moment that currently with the VUCA environment, all these lovely things that people are talking about of volatility, and today might not be tomorrow's challenges and so forth. So it's a very fast-paced world, and we find that the millennials, we're talking about the millennials now, but the younger generation is a very self-absorbed generation that is all about self-sufficiency and about pace, about everything has to be instantaneous. So talking about your teamwork and talking about those type of things is a great initiative, and I hope that it will include in the tools for coaching, because I come from a generation where it was not all about everything has to be instantaneous and so forth. It was about hard work and long hours to get where you are, and now the world is changing. So from a parent and a teacher and an industrial sector, we also need to have the tool to say, okay, but how are we then going to reinstall teamwork, team build, leading through example and so forth, to the younger generation where everything changes daily.
Yeah.
So that is for me a thing that we're struggling with at the moment. Is something that
Great.
we need to touch.
So I'm going to answer by talking about another aspect of our work, which is our Africa Careers Network, which is, so there's entrepreneurship is only one strand. As I mentioned, we have to accelerate. Those are going to be future politicians and civil society leaders, and then there's all those that are going to enter the job market, and they need to succeed. And there's a whole team that has done a lot of thinking on what you just talked about. I think the attitudes and behaviors of potential job seekers and the others, there is a commonality there, which is about being an entrepreneurial leader and developing some key skills, which are pervasive. And there's no doubt that there's a strong coaching element to success in the workplace today for young people that we can, I think, also help with some of the things that we've learned. And that program is significantly bigger because we have so many more. It's well over 1,000 people that we're supporting in their early transition into careers to be successful. So happy to introduce you on that level. Yes. Hi.
Thank you. I know the school encourages entrepreneurship from a very young age, and you just reinforced that. But I want to know is, once the students start a business whilst they're in the school, they leave the school to go to ALU or any other university, what happens to that business whilst they're away? Is there support at the school, or would it fall flat, or would they have to find their own support whilst they're studying further?
Great question. So we need to separate out the businesses that are created as part of the simulated economy versus maybe a business you would start that you really want to run with in life. And we have both of those examples. So the businesses that are part of the economy, they form through a whole process. You have to come up with an original idea for development as a young African. You coalesce into teams. The best teams land up entering the economy, and there's some succession of the anchor tenants, like our big retail business and our big manufacturer. Those are every year they're here. And the rule is quite simple. You are more than welcome as a team or an individual to take any business or idea that is generated here further. And we wish you luck and we'll support you, and I'll get to that. The only thing you can't do is prevent us from doing it again as another learning experience. So you cannot prevent the next year's kids from running a magazine and selling advertising. That's not okay. If you think that that's something that you're taking with you, right? There will be a follow-on for that. But we started something, and it's now called the Anzisha Accelerator. It started off as something called the Youth Entrepreneur Support Unit. But we have a dedicated team that are supporting anyone who is in college and starting a business or has already finished. And we've already identified the 4 sort of archetypes of entrepreneurs of this age. Starting from I'm kind of just started and I'm still figuring it out to I'm preparing for investment. We have a whole investment readiness program, and that's how we support them. And you'll also have heard maybe or seen in the strategic plan, we're about to launch an education accelerator. So now we're even starting with our first sector-focused, very dedicated intervention for people who are going to choose that sector within which to apply their entrepreneurial skill. So there is significant support. And there is nothing about what we do that prevents you from taking an idea that you had here and flying with it. We encourage it. I'll take one more. 4 minutes. Margaret? Okay. Anyone else got a question? Wonderful. So I'll ask. Oh, yes.
Hi, I'm Daryl from Sumbandila Scholarship Trust. We're based in the Limpopo province, South Africa. We have a big problem with developing young students quite successfully and then them leaving and not coming back, brain drain, essentially, which is also a big problem for Africa at the moment. How is ALA addressing that? Wonderful.
So it's not an entrepreneur-only question, that's a broader ALA question, and I'm happy to speak to it. When you choose to join the ALA community, there are 2 parts to it. The first is that as part of the application process and choosing to become part of our community, you self-select into being part of Africa's response to all the things that you want to change. Right? So it's something we manage very well up front. And if that's not something you want to do, then it's unlikely that you would be an ideal fit for African Leadership Academy. So our recruitment process is quite strong on that. And we seek that passion for Africa and wanting to contribute to its development early on, and we foster it and encourage it right through. the second part of that is you sign a commitment with us, essentially to the continent. It's a joint commitment between the family and the young person, the academy, and our supporters who fund whatever you can't afford to return. And should you not return, the value of your scholarship is repayable to us. Essentially, it's a forgivable loan that then is not forgiven. So there is a financial incentive to returning from our side. And then the third is the most important one, is you have to make return as attractive as possible, and you have to, so we have this Africa Careers Network that I talked about. Their entire, they live and breathe ensuring that the opportunities that our students who choose to study overseas come back to are exciting, challenging, and meaningful for them. And I'll never forget a conversation I had with one of our really talented young graduates, and he wanted to enter consulting for a period, just to learn. And it was only after we went through the cost of living of being in New York versus the cost of living of Johannesburg, with the absolute values of the salaries, and he could have more exciting work here, to be perfectly frank, with more exciting challenges, with more in pocket at the end of the day, by choosing to work for a consulting firm, McKinsey or otherwise, domestically, than if he did his 2-year stint there. And those are the kinds of conversations that we as an academy have with graduates from international universities that have been part of our program to encourage them to return. And so far we have certainly an over 60% return rate, and we only have a handful that have finished their full tertiary education, and we're very confident that they will return. So my point is, this is another kind of rocket. We have lots of rockets at ALA, and we'd love for people to come and learn from us. So reach out and come and just hang out with that team and find out what they do, and maybe that'll inform some of what you do. I think we're running out of time. So thank you so much. Did you want to have a comment, Margaret?
Just make a couple of comments. So just to complement Josh's work, so I work with Josh in institutional learning and impact measurement. And there are a few rockets that I wanted to call out because I think some of the questions here relate to those. One is that we're testing in our 2-year program through the students' own entrepreneurial leadership training. Thank you. Our students at ALA are running short boot camps for entrepreneurial leadership training or design thinking training in their local context. And we are beginning to learn from these short camps what can be replicable, shareable, and thank you. So are you hearing me if I'm speaking on? I'll just keep going this way. So one of the rockets that I think we'll be able to share more of in terms of a research or evidence base is these short-term boot camps that might hold promise for replicating across low-resource contexts with multiple education opportunity gap ranges for very young entrepreneurs and very young people across the continent. So that's something that I wanted to call out as a rocket that we already have, that we just haven't had a lot of time to invest in writing it up, and that's around the bend. Another is, we have a pilot that's about to start, that we received funding to do a 2-year pilot testing to see if our counseling and training for school counselors and teachers can be scaled and replicated with other institutions. So we have a pilot coming up where we're going to be partnering with Huawei in several of their country contexts and with BRAC in another context to see whether we can work with them as partners and begin to hand over and train so that we have the ability to scale through the teacher or counselor level some of the things that we're learning in ALA. That is, literally we just got that agreement in January, so within 24 months we expect to be able to share some really hefty learning with enough of a critical mass for us to have some statistical analysis weight behind it. A third thing that is on the horizon, particularly the next year or two, is we'll be investing in deeper analytics of skills mapping that draw both on the Anzisha learning as well as in our 2-year program. And this is really something that holds great promise if we can codify what we think are those most important skills, which are both the academic hardcore but also the emotional intelligence soft side of things. If we can help codify that and develop formative and summative ways to assess that against the things that we're doing at ALA that are working, we just don't know how necessarily. That's something that we expect to be able to also share. We have a mini pilot of that underway collaboratively in South Africa, particularly in Joburg, focusing first on skills for data and being able to manipulate and understand data and analytics. So I just wanted to add to Josh, there's some rockets that he's busy frontlining other things, but behind the scenes we're working.
Thank you, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your day. Thank